So, I mean, we've known each other a long, long time now, 12 years?
Yeah, 12 years.
12 years. So, I mean, what I've got here is a question, but I think it's a bit, you know, when did motorcycles become a thing for you? When did you start kind of getting into motorcycles and getting excited about motorcycles?
So there was a very, very clear moment in my life. And as a teenager, I had no interest in bikes, motorbikes at all, not even in the slightest. All I wanted was an Escort. So bear in mind, this was...
Ford Escort.
Ford Escort, yeah. So this was 1983, I guess. So that was
one.
Yeah, when I was 15, that was it. I saved my money, wanted a Ford Escort. It was a cool car to drive and what I could afford. But my buddy and I were also keen to build a go-kart because he had allotments behind his house and we were going to whiz around the allotments. But to do that, we needed an engine. And a friend of ours, his mum, was selling, we used to call it the granny step-through moped, but one of the ones where you had to pedal it to get it started. It shows how longer it was. And a friend's mum was selling one for a tenner. So it was a £5 in each. And it started first go, and we rode it back to through our little sleepy village, no helmets, back up to the house, taking turns, running alongside each other. And then we rode that around the allotments, and that was the point at which I got hooked from a granny step-through moped.
Well, literally just that one thing.
Just that one thing.
When did you pass your test like straight away, or did you wait until you were a bit older? Or
no, I passed my test. So again, back in those days, it was you could ride a moped on a provisional license at 16. So if anybody can remember RD50, yeah, RD50, which was the most uncool bike compared to my friends who all had TSX 50s, which were much cooler than mine. But my dad told me it was the best bike to get. Yeah, DTs were even cooler. Yeah, and my mate had a DT 175 with a jacked up suspension. It was the coolest bike in the world, and he could pull wheelies on it. So then it was 50cc bikes on a provisional license when you were 16. And the day I turned 17, I got a 125. I think I took my part 1 test the weekend after, because that was way before CBTs. It was part 1 and part 2. So I did my part 1 and then part 2 literally a few weeks later. But it was much easier then.
Yeah, I think I did a week intensive course. I'd never been on a motorcycle. A week later, I could drive any motorcycle I wanted to. It's like, can't be safe.
No. Well, the part 2 test, which now is just like a normal driving test with the examiner, they go with you, I think, with radios. Yeah. Mine, it was just, you walked out the... Yeah, you said turn left, 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 and keep on going left until I walk out in front of you with a big sign, and he said, and then do an emergency stop, and that'll be it.
That was it?
And that was it.
Seriously?
Wow. That was it. I was going round and round for half an hour, thinking, where the hell's he gone?
Do you have one of those moments where you're thinking, is this just he's just gone and I'm not here? And
I did wonder. He said, I'm not going to tell you how long I'll be. He said, but I'll be watching you everywhere you go. Didn't see him until he walked out in front of me.
That doesn't sound at all creepy, does it? But I mean, if we go, in terms of your life kind of timeline, so in bikes you had a weird bit of a kind of a break almost. So you went to university and you were planning to become a pilot, fighter pilot. And then didn't go very well because... Yep. So yeah, I think it's an interesting story. I think it kind of
the fighter pilot
says
story.
about you. The fighter pilot story. Yeah.
In fact, I was just talking to Alan earlier, and I bumped into my old best friend from school. I hadn't seen him for 20 years, and he reminded me on how focused I was on becoming a fast jet pilot in the RAF. And he said, when you were 16, 17, he said, you could name every member of the cabinet in the government, you could say where every single RAF base was around the world, and what aircraft flew from there, and this and that, all the kind of things you had to be able to kind of have some knowledge about when you went through the application process. I actually went back and looked at the kind of data from, this would have been 1985. So before I went to uni, so I went through the process beforehand. And I think it was 1 in every 4,000 people, or it was men at the time because they didn't take girls, who applied, got through the process to be offered a place to fly fast jets. So I went through all that process, and it was, you had to have a local interview, and then interviews in London, and then you did 4 days at Biggin Hill with the pilot assessment, and that was kind of leadership skills as well as all the, I mean, it was kind of computer games of the time to check your kind of ability to eye and hand coordination, all that kind of stuff. And the thing I remember being the hardest was trying to remember strings of numbers. That was just I don't know why that was the hardest thing, because my memory's shit, probably.
Well, like those little games to like...
It was just literally, you started off with 2 numbers. Remember these 2 numbers, type it in. Remember 2 numbers, then remember 3. It got up to like 10 or 12. It's because as a fighter pilot, you had to remember coordinates and be able to put them in. That was the test.
Yeah.
So you do those 4 days, and then you have a medical, and then they put you through a specific air medical as well. And I got offered a place with sponsorship at university. So that was kind of big do, and I was, as I said, looking back, I probably actually worked quite hard for it. But it was all I'd ever wanted to do. Although when I look right back, my kind of long-term plan was actually to be an astronaut. But in those days, all astronauts had been fast jet pilots. You know, it's different today, but...
There is a fantastic picture of Graham when he was at university. And he couldn't have styled himself more on Tom Cruise if he tried. It was unbelievable. Aviator, sunglasses, same haircut. It was just Tom Cruise from Top Gun.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
not even a little bit different.
It was. Yeah, a little bit taller, yes. Yeah, just not quite as good looking.
Oh, don't do yourself down, buddy.
No, I mean, he wasn't quite.
Oh, okay.
So yes, I was offered the place, offered sponsorship to university. And back in those days, it's only after you'd done all that, they went back and checked your medical records back at your GPs. And I'd had 1 asthma attack, exercise-induced, when I was 12 or something. So 3 months after, I had 3 months of thinking I was going to be in the RAF as a fast jet pilot. And they sent me a letter saying, we've seen you've had an asthma attack when you were 12. Thank you for your interest in the RAF. If you're interested, you can join the RAF regiment. So that was it. So, yeah, it was, when I look back on it, it was kind of devastating, but equally, I just thought, okay, well, if I can't do that, what am I going to do instead?
And then you got hit with the big C.
Yes, yeah. So I then didn't get all my A-levels, so I didn't quite go to the university I expected to, but ended up going to Plymouth, which actually was, in the end, was a fantastic place to go to. And whilst I was still trying to work out what I wanted to do instead of flying fast jets, I joined the Marines Reserves, because there was a big detachment in Plymouth and we were close to Lympstone where we did all our training, to see whether joining the Marines as an officer would be something I'd be interested in doing. Really enjoyed doing that, but it made me realise that wasn't what I wanted. So went for, they used to call it a seaman officer, so basically the guys who drive the boats in the Navy. And whilst I was actually on board a frigate for still whilst I was a student, but they used to do sort of things you could go on and for 2 or 3 days, see what it's like, what life is like in the Navy. And I was talking to the medical officer on board about flying, and he said, well, why don't you apply for the Fleet Air Arm? As in those days, to fly Harrier jets on carriers. And I said, well, the RAF turned me down because of the asthma. He went, you've been in the Marines for 2 years, you've obviously not got a problem with asthma. He said, so I actually changed my application whilst I was from seaman officer to Fleet Air Arm to fly Harriers. And similar kind of process, but for the Navy, and passed all that. So got accepted into Fleet Air Arm to fly Harrier jets. And then I was doing my very final kind of interview, but they called it the Chief of the Air Medical Board. So he was the head honcho specifically in the Navy for the Fleet Air Arm. And I'd found this lump under my arm when I was having a shower one day. And he said, I still remember the words clearly as anything. And he said, is there anything else you want to tell me before I kind of sign all the paperwork? I said, well, finally enough, I've got this kind of lump under my arm. And he went, you know what, we'll just see what that is, and then we'll sign you off. And it turned out to be non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is cancer of the lymph glands. So there was a year of chemotherapy and radiotherapy and all that kind of stuff. And I went back to see him after a year. So all this time, I was still thinking I was going to get in. And he sat me down and he said, right, he said, bad news first is he said, you're not going to get into the Fleet Air Arm to fly fast jets. And he said, there's a very simple reason. He said, say every year we have 100 young men who pass the level we need, and we'll take the top 10. He said, you'll always be number 100 because you'll be a bad investment compared to the rest. He said, because if we're going to spend £5 million training you to be a fast jet pilot, your chance of being ill and not being able to complete that is harder than everybody else's. And he said, that's shit, but that's the way things are. And then he said something again that's just stuck with me all these years. And he said, you're now thinking, did I know this was going to be the answer a year ago when you told me you had cancer? And he said, I said, yeah, I am thinking that. And he said, well, let me ask you a question first. He said, at any point during the last year, has the thought of getting into the Navy helped you through the bad times? And I said, every day. He said, that's why I didn't tell you last year. He was right as well. Yeah. But as a kind of thing about motivation, that's always stuck with me. It's about how that goal in my head got me through all the shit days when I lost all my hair, when I put on loads of weight and feeling sick all the time. I used to get out my prospectus for the Naval Academy and read it, and it was kind of thumbed worn in the end. Because literally every day I'd look at it and go, it's all right, I can get through this because I'll be doing that next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I never flew in the end. That's kind of a very long, shaggy log story, but.
But then, is that, I mean, obviously that sense of adventure for you and wanting to do something a bit different and do those kind of adventurous things. Once you couldn't, obviously flying was your key one, and then obviously, is that where part of where this kind of idea of doing all the motorcycle trips and stuff that you've done on motorbikes has kind of come in, or is that just completely separate, do you reckon?
No, it is. I will explain the reason why. So the love of motorbikes never went. So when I found out I had cancer, I'm not quite sure how we managed to do this. We managed to blag two motorbikes. There was a ZX10 and a CBR 1000F. This was 1988, from two local dealerships, and they lent those bikes to us for 2 weeks and put us on their insurance. One of the guys didn't even have a bike license, and he was riding it. So I'm not quite sure how he managed that. But we actually raised quite a lot of money for charity and stuff as well. So the love of bikes never really went, but I couldn't afford my own during that time. But when I then started working and could afford my own bikes, I only ever had sports bikes. ZX6, ZX10, ZZR 1100, Fireblade, which I've still got. So it was sports bikes or sports tourers until I kind of, like so many people, I watched Long Way Round. And my best buddy, the guy who didn't have the license at the time when we managed to blag the two bikes, so at that point he did have a motorcycle license. And twice a year we'd go off and we'd go somewhere for the weekend and get drunk, ride back with a hangover, late in the afternoon of course. And I watched Long Way Round the first time it came on TV. And I watched the first episode and I rang him up and I went, you've got to watch this program, you've got to watch this. It's two best mates. They're doing the stuff that we should be doing rather than just riding to Blackpool and getting pissed. And he started watching it, and that's what inspired us to do something adventurous. And that's what inspired me to ride to Moscow and back. So
then you did do your big ride to Moscow was your first kind of endurance challenge almost.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, that was, what year was that?
95, almost 18 years ago now.
Getting old.
I didn't have any grey hair then.
So that was London to Moscow essentially, wasn't it?
Yes.
In a long weekend, is it?
We got there and back in 6.5 days. So
yeah.
It's almost 4,000 miles.
And then that was you and Andrew?
Yes, yeah. So that was ours and mine, first experience of still trying to blag, well actually not our first experience of trying to blag bikes because we did that when we were students. But so we decided we only had a week, and he was the one who had encouraged me to join the Marines Reserve, so we'd done that together. And when we were trying to decide what would be a really good adventure that you can fit into a week, because that was all time we could take off of work, but something that wasn't just an adventure, but something that was really challenging. And he said, well, what about riding to Moscow and back? I went, yeah, but that's good. And only then did we look at how far it was. And the Yamaha guys who loaned us the bikes, who I still know, 17 years later, the guy who was the PR guy at Yamaha. And they loaned us the bikes for a weekend beforehand, and we rode to Fort William in Scotland and back in a weekend. And that was only something like 400 miles each way, and we had to do 700 miles a day average. So, and we were shattered after that. We thought, oh, no. But yeah, and it was a true adventure in terms of going somewhere completely outside our comfort zones.
Well, did you camp, or did you kind of stay in hotels? What did you do?
No, it was all hotels. Because we were up at 6 in the morning and rarely finishing before midnight. So if we were camping, it would just been a nightmare.
So it's almost like it's better to not camp when you go on trips.
If you're doing 700 miles a day and 18 hours riding, Tom.
Shut up, camping sucks. Right. So then, of course, for those that don't know, I'm sure you probably do, Graham did a TV show. His first ever TV show with a guy called Danny John Jules. Obviously things have gone a bit downhill since then, because now you're making them with me. So I think the question that everyone knows that you've done 2 series with Danny. You did Mad in the Med and Dakar Dreams. So before we'll get on to how you met Danny, which is a really weird story. But I mean, most people watch Long Way Round and go, let's be mates and go on a trip and do this and do that. Wouldn't that be great? Why did you go, oh no, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do a TV show about it as well?
So when we did the trip to Moscow and back, we filmed it just for ourselves. And I really enjoyed the process of doing the filming. I enjoyed the process of the editing. And you're talking about the kind of the after effects of the cancer, and does that change your mindset on things? And yes, it makes me obsessive about stuff a little bit. As in, if I get an idea in my head and I've told myself I'm going to do it, I will end up doing it, or I'll end up, well, I don't think there's anything I've set my mind to that I haven't done, pretty much, in some shape or form. And after watching Long Way Round and doing that endurance trip, I just thought there was something in the idea of a 2-week endurance type of challenge, something you could do in 2 weeks.
Because that is the problem with the kind of format of let's go around the world. You need to take 6-8 months off work. You need a huge amount of money set aside to kind of let you survive during that amount of time, don't you? Most people can get 2 weeks off work, except you, Graham. But yeah, most people can get 2 weeks off work.
Yes. Yeah. And that was the idea. And so I'm not quite sure why I got the idea about riding around the Mediterranean Sea, but that would be 7,000 miles in 14, 15 days. I think because it was something I felt after doing the Moscow trip was doable in terms of the mileage, but it would still definitely be an endurance challenge. And I went through a lot. I mean, in the end, it was 4 or 5 years before I got the advice. In the end, it was from, presumably you've all seen, I can't see anybody's faces unless I do that, but presumably you've all seen Long Way Round or Long Way Down. Yeah. But heard of it. Yeah. Anyway, so if you've seen it, you must say, obviously you got Charlie and Ewan, but you've got the other 2 guys. So Russ being the little short, dark-haired English producer. So I saw him at one of the bike shows.
For a second, I thought you were going to do the entire rest of the thing like that.
Well, it's nice seeing people's faces.
This is why I'm wearing a cap.
Yeah, it's a good idea, actually. So I saw him at one of the bike shows, and I'd been trying to get this thing off the ground for about 3 years, maybe even a bit longer. And actually, I'd joined forces with another small TV producer, because by itself, with somebody with no track record, there was no way I was going to get anybody to commission something, as opposed to taking it to them and saying, here is a finished thing. And I saw Russ. This is when the Long Way Round stuff was still on the BMW stands or the bike shows. And I explained what I was doing, and he said, look, you're probably never going to get it off the ground just you, because you've got no history. He said, either do it with somebody else, and I'd sort of been down that road a couple of times and got very close. He said, or just if you can find someone to sponsor it, just go and do it and film it as best you can. And if it's any good, somebody might take it when you get back. So in the end, that's what I did. I forgot what the question was now, sorry.
You're the Man the Med trip, so you went down, the route you took was down, did you cross at the bottom of Italy? Or did you went right round, didn't you?
So we drove down through Europe to the tip of Italy. In the end, we were going to go on the ferry to Algeria and then Tunisia, but we didn't get our Algerian visas literally to the morning we left, by which time I'd already changed the ferries to go to Tunisia. So we missed Algeria. But no, ferry from Italy to Tunisia.
Do you think you could do that journey these days? I don't think you can anymore, can you?
No, you couldn't do it 2 years after we did it. Weirdly, the Arab Spring followed our route because there was all the trouble in Tunisia, then it was Libya, then Egypt, and then Jordan. Sorry, not Jordan, then Syria. Just because we went anti-clockwise and it followed us around, basically.
Yeah, so is it, I mean, it really, it's not something you can do these days. It's a kind of a, when they say once in a lifetime, it really was for that. You couldn't repeat it now, could you?
Not at the moment, no. I mean, I guess in theory you could, if you wanted to ride through Syria, you could, but I don't think it would be highly recommended.
Yeah, it might be an interesting.
Yeah. You know what? One of the obviously any of that trouble is incredibly sad, but we stayed in some of the cities, Aleppo, and that's been the centre of horrific war in there, and it was just like going to not quite a European city because it was Syria, but the life people were leading there was no different to life we're leading here. We went to this castle because somebody recommended. It was called Crac de Chevalier, but means Castle of the Cavaliers. So we went there, and there was coaches, and it was just like going and visiting Warwick Castle, and that's all been bombed and shelled and stuff. Incredibly, or anything like that is incredibly sad. But when you've been there and seen what it was like before, even worse, I think.
So you did that trip with the cat, Danny John Jules. Mm-hmm. So you didn't know Danny John Jules. No. You literally just went, should we do that? You just literally phoned him up.
Not
wrote
quite.
him an email. So yeah, how did it work?
Yeah. So I took the guy's advice from the Long Way Round team, and through my day job, I'd found some sponsorship because we were going to stay at some of the hotels. I had a client who had lots of hotels around the Med, and I was going to do some filming at those, and therefore they paid me a bit of money. It was just enough to kind of pay for most of the cost of the trip. So I had the money, and I'd got bikes from Honda, Transalp 650s. And that was the other thing. I wanted to prove you could do it on smaller bikes. That you didn't have to have, as wonderful as the GSs are, and I still think they're incredible bikes, but I wanted to prove you didn't have to have a really expensive big adventure bike of any kind. So we had little adventure bikes. So I had the bikes from Honda sorted out, had the kind of kit sorted out, and some money to make sure we could get round and fuel ourselves, etc. And my Moscow buddy was going to come and do it with me, but he then couldn't get time off work for some reason. So literally with 6 weeks to go, I had this whole trip set up, the money to do it, basically a spare place. So I was trying to find somebody who had either a journalist or somebody who could just bring some sort of PR to it. So Nick Sanders actually got back to me. I emailed him through his website. I didn't know him at the time. And he actually would have come with me, but it clashed with something else he was doing. Now, I'm not sure whether that would have been a good or a bad thing. Probably a good thing, actually, in the end.
That's if you could have kept up.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
He's not slow, is he?
So, and there was another journalist who I got in contact with. He couldn't make it. So at the time, I don't know if they still do it, but Motorcycle News had a column, a guest column, I should say. They have lots of columns, but they had one that was written by guests every week.
Just the one column.
Just the one in the whole of Motorcycle News. So I wrote to the editor and I said, look, I actually said to him, first of all, have you got a journalist who you could, would you send one of your team along with me, completely paid for? And they said, no, we can't spare anybody for 2 weeks with 6 weeks' notice. Really? I don't think they thought I was being serious. So they said, however, here's the contact details of all our guest columnists. So they sent me phone numbers and email addresses for
Just
Danny.
to be clear, this was pre-GDPR rules, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, just have all the addresses of all these celebrities that we've had on the show.
Yeah.
It'll be fine. I'm sure he looks trustworthy.
So Danny was one of them. Nick Knowles, you know, DIY SOS. One of the hairy bikers. I forget the bigger one. Him. I forgot his name now. Is it Simon, is it? Yeah. And somebody else. So there's somebody else I can't remember because they never got back to me. But Nick Knowles replied and said, sounds fantastic, would have really loved to come, but yeah, I'm filming, can't do it. Simon ran me back. He said, oh mate, I'd love to come, but I'm too fucking busy. If that's how he speaks.
What was that?
That's a Geordie! Thank you very much. Yeah, he's Scottish and Spanish, comes from Poland or something. And Danny, I emailed him. So I emailed him Thursday afternoon or something, and he emailed me back that evening. And I found out later, what they'd sent me was an old email address, and he hadn't looked at it in almost a year. He just happened to look at it that night, and he also thought he knew me. So, you know, when you talk about the stars sort of lined up, they kind of did, because he looked at his email, and he said he probably wouldn't have replied if he had realised he didn't know me at all, but he thought he'd met me somewhere. So he replied and said, oh, that sounds interesting, let's have a chat tomorrow morning. So we spoke on the phone, and I was a bit, it's a cat from Red Dwarf, you know. And he was just really, I actually thought he was American. I hadn't realised he was a Londoner. So when this London voice, I thought, is that actually him?
It is, if you've only seen him on that, or even Death in Paradise, because you know,
yeah.
and then you hear him and he's like, what?
Yeah, North London boy. Come
on in.
And he said, so I explained what I was doing, and then he said, oh, so you're not the person I thought you were. It was just Friday morning. He said, oh, well, he said, let me just check with my other half. That afternoon, he said, yeah, I'll come. And again, when I got to know him, so the other star that lined up was he'd actually had a really, really shit 18 months. And again, I don't know if any of you, I'm going to look at faces again. Did any of you remember, so this is going back 10, 12 years ago, he was in the Sun newspaper for attacking a bin man with a samurai sword. Have you remember that? Oh, so and he was convicted as well. So he was convicted and given community service. However, he then had the conviction overturned. So he is not guilty. But that was, despite the fact there was a picture of him in his dressing gown with a samurai sword next to the bin man. I have seen the picture.
Running after a bin man down the street. It's fine.
So, and Red Dwarf had finished. He was also in The Storyteller, MI High. Basically, all his TV stuff had finished.
I used to do...
he was the head teacher in MI High.
Maid Marian.
Maid Marian, yes.
And a Merry Men.
Yeah.
She was great.
All his TV stuff had dried up. So that was the last sort of star to line up was, he said, I just needed a break. And he said, what you ran me up with, he said, was basically a break from the shit he'd been through for the last year. He said, I didn't think I was going to have any work. He said everything was drying up. I mean, he's never going to have to worry about money because of Red Dwarf. As he said, that's his pension. But
yeah.
All the stars kind of lined up. And then I went and met him the next week. And because I didn't really kind of appreciate how tiny he is. He's not only not particularly tall, but he's incredibly slim, unbelievably fit.
Very dancer's frame, isn't it?
Yeah, very dancer's frame. But I met him in his local North London pub, and he turned up in all this huge, great, baggy grey sweatsuit, and spent the first hour and a half showing me pictures of him at MotoGP the previous weekend. And he even brought his laptop to show me as well. he does have a picture of himself with somebody in MotoGP. So, there you go, that was the story of how I met Danny.
And then you went on to do lots of other things. So you met me when we did, because you needed a cameraman, because it turns out that you and Danny on your own, probably need someone to film you. You know the kind of selfie thing you get now where you're doing that? Basically, imagine that, but 12 years ago, and it's just him and Danny either filming each other or going, hi!
Yeah, bear in mind, I'm up here and Danny's down here. I'm having to do that all the time.
I must admit, I remember when we started talking and you said, because it hadn't been on TV when we started talking about your second trip.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then I tuned in to watch it. And I remember, because it was one of my first big things. I'd done a trip through Africa the year before. But, you know, I hadn't really done anything TV. I was still kind of moving up. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm actually, you know, I've said I'll do this as cameraman, but I wonder whether I've just kind of jumped. I'm not sure I've told you this. Like, I've just jumped in here and gone, yeah, I can do it. And now I'm going, I don't know if I can. And then me and my wife Emma, we sat down to watch Mad in the Med. And I turned it on. And then these really quite posh animated graphics started with all these little bits of animation, the bikes going along. And I thought, oh, Christ, this is like a really quite high-end production.
And then the rest of it came in.
And then the actual videoing started. I was like, oh, I'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, bear in mind the channel that took it, which was, I don't know if they
Extreme Sports
Extreme
TV,
Sports, yeah. I don't know if they exist anymore. His comment was, I liked it because it was earthy. Shit.
But then that's how we met, because
Yes.
they basically said, well, we want to do another one, but can you please take a cameraman with you this time?
Yeah, the production quality is going to be a bit higher next time.
Yeah. And then your second one was Dakar Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And then since then, you've gone on to do lots of other TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, Motorbike TV and Adventure Bike TV, hopefully you all know.
I hope so.
Yeah. Anyone? No? And then, you know, but you've also done Great British Bike Off, Great Arctic Bike Off and things like that.
Yeah.
What's next, though?
Well, I should ask you, really. You're the producer.
All right, just shove it all over to Tom. No, but I mean, is there, you know, obviously we talk about Adventure Bike TV, Motorbike TV and stuff like that a lot, and where we're going with it, what we're doing next year, etc. This year. Oh, that's creeping up on me.
Yes. Yeah.
What are you doing this year? But what about if we look, you know, have you got any other plans for series like, you know, like your Mad in the Meds? Are you going to team up with Danny ever again? Is there any ideas or anything that you're thinking about outside of that? In which case, why haven't you told me about them yet?
Not at the moment, because you know if I had, because I would have told you about them. No, I mean, how long ago did we do the last one, you and I? So we did Mad in the Med, then 2 years later Dakar Dreams, and maybe 3 or 4 years after that we did
Arctic
Bike Off, which is all the way to Nordkap and back.
That changed last minute as well, because originally that was going to be going over to...
It was doing the all the way across Russia.
Yeah, all the way across Russia, and then things kicked off in Russia, so we decided to try and go around the Baltic, didn't we?
Things that kicked off in Russia then seemed a bit minor compared
to compared to what's going on now. Nothing was going on in Russia.
Yeah.
It was fine. But yeah, and then we decided to go around the Baltic, didn't we?
Yes.
Up to Nordkap.
Yeah. Which in the end was I thought was a good trip and interesting.
Yeah.
I would hope.
Apart from the fact that, you know, stupidly I suggested doing that, and I also hate being cold. And I was like, hey, let's go to the Arctic Circle. That'd be cool. And it was cold. Yeah. And I was miserable. I fell asleep in a toilet. It was so cold. We were. Do you remember that night? We basically just were at a rest stop on the lay-by. And then it was freezing cold. I was really cold, but then the toilet had one of those little wall heaters. And I remember about 3 o'clock in the morning just being so cold and just going in and sitting on the toilet and just falling asleep under this heater like that.
Yes, yeah. But that was not quite a game changer, but it was a super learning experience, because we'd already done Dakar Dreams.
Yeah.
And again, that was a learning experience. But when we did that, and the channel said to us, well, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to do the old man's version of the Dakar Rally. Yeah, but what are you going to do? And they found it very hard to get their head around what's going to be interesting for the audience. To which my answer is, we're doing an old man's version of the Dakar Rally. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
No, but what are you going to do? So we did have to sort of give them a little bit of detail about where we were going to go and the kind of things we might try and explore. But when it came to do the Arctic one, where you didn't even have the exoticness, and I remember you saying to me, it doesn't feel like it's going to be very exotic. So how is it going to be interesting for the audience?
Mostly because it was all road-based. There was no kind of, you know, when we did Dakar Dreams, you know, we had those bits where we tried to go through the desert, and
And you have exotic scenery, and I mean,
Didn't
Norway
go terribly well through that, did it?
No, no. I mean, Norway's unbelievably beautiful, and it's incredible scenery. But your point about it's kind of a more extreme version of what we might see here, or in Scotland, or in Wales, for that matter. But you don't have sand dunes and the kind of thing you don't see anywhere in Europe.
It didn't feel like a challenge. I think that was the thing, wasn't it?
No.
It just felt like you were going on a cool trip.
Yeah. But the big difference there, the channel insisted on pretty much an itinerary and what we were going to do every day. So they wanted to see, so every day had to have almost something interesting planned every day. Somewhere to visit, a group of people to try and explore with, or there had to be something that they could get their head around. This will make it interesting for the audience. Now, of course, on any adventure, things always happen.
And it's the stuff you don't know that's going to happen, the people you meet along the way that make it interesting, but they weren't going to bank on that happening, were they?
No, no. But that was again quite an endurance one, because we had to do 400 miles every day to get, because most people, if they do NORCAP, do a month to get up there and back, or at least 3 weeks, and we had 2 weeks.
Because it wasn't because it's up to NORCAP and then back down through Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, that right round the other side of the Baltic as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. So we made sure. One day we were on the summer bobsleigh. Next day was some super bridge we had to cross, and then
the Arctic Raceway.
Yeah, Arctic Raceway, Arctic Circle, and then you're up to actually getting to NORCAP, and then coming back through Finland. We're coming back through this area. I think they call it the Thousand Lakes or something. Yeah. And we stopped and did something in summer racing buggies of some kind.
Oh yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, that was a bit weird, wasn't it? And then we were stopping at an old Russian nuclear missile base on the way back through. I think it was that.
And that old hospital that really freaked you out. If you ever watch the Great Arctic Bike Off, there is a bit on it which I put in to freak out Graham, and then because he didn't realise it was there, I just left it. So we went to this kind of old abandoned. It was an old abandoned manor house that I think during the war they turned it into a hospital, and then it kind of just stayed like that. It's a really kind of spooky place. And someone had clearly gone in at some point with red paint and put little kids' handprints in red on the walls. Really freaky.
That isn't what I saw. What I saw was a child trying to get out. Not someone that got in there and done handprints. That's what freaked me out. Well, one of the many things that freaked me out about it.
There's this great bit where he's walking along and I have to go out now. I'm too freaked out. I've got to get out. And then I phoned him up after he got back, and I was like, Graham, I've been watching this footage back, and there's these two little eyes staring at us from this platform. And he was like,
really?
What, really? I was like, yeah, there was. It's really freaky. He said, send me the footage. So I sent this footage, and of course, I just completely faked it. But you were convinced that it was real. And he was like, oh no, oh my God. And then we were watching it at your house. I can't remember why. A couple of years later, and your daughter Izzy came in and, oh look, it's the fake eyes. And you went, what? And she's like, look at them, they're clearly fake. And I was sitting there, you looked at me, I was going, yeah, they're fake.
I had 2 years of freaking out about it. Convinced there was something in there. A small feral child that had left the handprints on the wall, obviously.
I mean, it did make me kind of question your eyesight because they weren't done well. But you just, But they were left in for the TV show and everything.
But that became a good example of, as I always tell my wife, those things we're working. It's not fun. It is working.
It's hard work.
It is hard work, because you've got to do 400 miles a day, and actually all the way through Norway. Not so bad through Finland because you can go faster, but all the way through Norway, it's a very, very strict 50-mile-an-hour limit. Like if they catch you speeding, you're into jail, and then they'll talk about it in the morning. So that's why people don't speed there. So the math says 50 miles an hour, 400 miles a day. You've got at least 8 hours of riding, and then we always had something to do to film for a couple of hours. So that's 10 hours. And that's before you've had any food or rest.
Just to be clear, are you trying to justify this as work? Is this what all this is? It's like,
just in case Michelle should happen to see this.
Yeah. It's quite hard, you know, especially for the cameraman. He has to back up all the footage in the afternoon, get all the kit ready, pack up for anyone else to film you guys. Just saying. And there's you going, oh, I have to turn up and make myself look pretty. Yeah, no, it's really, really hard work.
Yeah. But you see the violin playing for you.
Yeah, yeah. It's not hard work, though, is it? It's fun. Let's be honest.
It is a lot of fun, yes.
But I think, yeah, it's harder work than
Yes.
just going on a trip.
So I do remember your question was what comes next.
Yeah. We got there eventually.
I got there eventually. So I think with so much time spent on motorbike TV and adventure bike TV, there hasn't really been the time to do another thing as well.
Yeah. Do you regret that? Not
No.
regret it. That's probably the wrong way of doing it.
because
But,
adventure bike TV and motorbike TV
is it something?
are both
Do you miss
brilliant.
doing that kind of stuff? Because obviously we do Tales from the Trails on the show, but can I just say, Graham, on our last Sam, when we went to we went down to Cornwall, and literally we had an entire day where we were doing it in a sidecar. So I was sitting in this sidecar, bored out my brains, while he drove all the way around Plymouth going, oh, there was a nightclub there that I used to go to. Oh, and literally we started going down all these side roads. I'm thinking, why on earth are you going down here? It's like, stopped. I was like, I used to live there. It's like, okay.
I had a fantastic day. It was
after about
proper trip down memory lane. It was great.
Sat there, didn't he? He sat there and he's on the intercom going, I used to live there. I remember that. And then I had this girlfriend that used to come and visit me there. And then this happened. And then he went, oh no, it was that one. Yeah, that was a great day. Yeah,
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Do you remember that day well? It's
Sam enjoyed it. Yeah.
So yeah. So
Yes.
next is just continuing with that, is it? Or
Yeah.
you must have some
well,
other ideas for
there was
shows.
one. The other point to make though is the work that has to go into one of those 2-week trips is. I mean, anybody, if you've organised your own trip, you'll know it's a lot of work to organise it, particularly if you're organising somebody to stop every night, exactly where you're going to go. But if it's a sponsored TV show ride, it's a completely different ball game, and all that extra work in addition to what we do for motorbike TV and adventure bike TV, just haven't got time for it at the moment.
Could normal jobs get in the way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Have you ever thought about doing it full time?
Oh God, yeah. If I could earn enough to do it full time, of course I would. Much more fun than real work.
Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll have a 15-minute break now.